Which Mets top prospects can make the biggest impression in big league camp this spring? I'm going to break them all down on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Now, today is the first Friday farm report of spring training, so I figured this would be the perfect time to let you know which Mets top prospects are in camp, who can make the biggest impression that might even lead to an eventual promotion in 2025. And the guy to start with is the top prospect in the Mets system, depending on the outlet you check, and that is Brandon Sproat. If it's not Brandon Sproat, it's Jett Williams. But the clear thing is there is no pitching prospect in the Mets system that is more highly regarded than Brandon Sproat. You were talking about a guy the Mets drafted twice, eventually landing him, what was it, I guess the 2023 draft in the second round pick? Was he drafted third round first time, second round the second time, I believe? I am correct on that. Third round in 2022. Year later, they drafted him in the second round out of the University of Florida, which is of note because I think Brandon Sproat can follow the blueprint of his former college teammate, Christian Scott. Last year, Christian Scott was the top pitching prospect in the Mets system going into spring. He really turned a lot of heads, so much so that they laid things out for Christian Scott to get a start near the end of camp, which is very uncharacteristic of a big league team to give a prospect a full start in big league camp. I mean, you just don't see it often because typically all of those starts are going to go to your big league starters or the guys that are vying for those back end spots where you have those guys stretched out so you can make your decision of who's going to be in the big league rotation. The Mets were never considering Christian Scott to be part of the big league rotation last year, but he had done such a great job making that impression that the Mets decided to reward him with his own start in Jupiter in the ballpark that he grew up going to games as a Marlins fan, against the Marlins with a bunch of his friends and family in attendance. And Christian Scott turned in 4 innings, did not walk a batter. He struck out 7. He gave up 2 hits, one of them a solo homer. But that was the start that really let you know, oh, this guy's pretty close. Now, the Marlins aren't a great team. They weren't a great team. But still, he was going up against a big league lineup, and he struck out 7 in 4 innings and really just completely dominated. Then he goes down to AAA, makes 5 starts, pitches to a 3.20 ERA, strikes out 36 to only 6 walks, 6-1 strikeout to walk rate's pretty darn good. All of a sudden, it's May 4th, and Christian Scott's in the big leagues. Now, I think Christian Scott could have had a bigger impact last year, but the Mets had a pivot where they decided, you know what, David Peterson's healthy. We got, Sean Manaea, Luis Severino, Jose Quintana, Tyler McGill. Let's roll with our veteran rotation at this point. Let these guys pitch every 5th day. That is going to be our strength rather than going to a 6-man rotation because their bullpen was really struggling. They also thought, you know what, we can watch Christian Scott's innings a little bit, try to protect him. Obviously, it didn't work because he ended up needing Tommy John surgery anyway. But there was a point in time where Christian Scott was being factored pretty heavily into the Mets' plans last year. I think the same thing can happen for Brandon Sproat. If he has a good camp, makes a really good impression on the coaches, which he already is doing because Carlos Mendoza raved about him today. If all things go well there, he goes back to AAA and has a better time than he did last year because last year, Brandon Sproat really struggled once he got to AAA, had no problem in high A where he pitched to a 1.07 ERA to start the year, goes to AA, makes 11 starts, pitches to a 2.45 ERA with, I think it was 77 strikeouts and 62 and a third innings pitched, then gets that call to AAA, struggled to pitch to a 7.53 ERA in those 7 starts, but now he's got a chance for a do-over. And they sort of talked about both Mendoza and Brandon Sproat. And if you saw his media session, if you know, you know. But Brandon Sproat talked about the mental side of those struggles last year and how that was a good thing for him in the long run. Carlos Mendoza said the same thing. So now we'll see how he builds on it. But you're talking about a pitcher where if he has a good camp, has a good start to the season in AAA, he's not that far down the depth chart. He's not on the 40-man roster. But now that Jose Butto is officially a reliever for this season, you basically have 8 guys on the depth chart ahead of Brandon Sproat. You have, of course, Minaya, Senga, Holmes, Peterson, Frankie Montas, Griffin Canning, or Paul Blackburn, the 2 favorites to get that 6th starter spot because they have to be on the big league roster. The other one likely is a long man in the bullpen, assuming everyone's healthy. And then you have Tyler McGill, who could be the tough luck guy on the outside looking in just because he has that minor league option, in which case the 2 guys who would be waiting in the wings during this season would be McGill and potentially Brandon Sproat, assuming he is having success. So this is a pitching prospect that all eyes should be on right now. And if you're not aware of what he has to offer, he's going to get the most recognition for his fastball, which can reach the triple digits. But the pitch I want you to pay attention to is his changeup. Scouts raved about this pitch last year. Aram Layton, who was our lead prospect analyst for Just Baseball, knows more about prospects than anyone I know. He was telling me last year, like, dude, this changeup's insane. He compared it to a light version of Paul Skeens' Splinker. Those of you not aware, Paul Skeens has a pitch that has been dubbed the Splinker, a splitter sinker hybrid. Essentially, it's a very hard changeup that just dives, and it's impossible for hitters to square up. That is what Brandon Sproat has to offer. It's obviously not up to Skeens' level, but it's a hard changeup that gives you that real horizontal drop to it that really is a great pitch to pair with his fastball, which has that ride up in the zone. And now he's added a sinker to the mix this offseason, which is, your typical 2-seam fastball that he could throw into the hands of right-handed batters, get some ground balls early in counts, just give a different look to the velocity so guys can't just key on the 4-seam. Now you got a couple of variations of his fastball, and that would also allow his 4-seam to play even more up in the zone, really show even more ride to it just because you don't know what to expect. He's got a couple breaking balls with a short slider and a more sweeping sweeper. So he's got a legitimate 5-pitch arsenal that he's rounding into form. Obviously, he's got to continue to work on those pitches, particularly the off-speed pitches. But this is a guy that the Mets have developed and will continue to develop that could become a frontline starter. I would think that most scouts who are going to be a little more, cautious when they grade prospects, they're going to say, oh, he can be a number 3 starter. Don't take that as a knock. A scout saying that a pitcher could be a number 3 starter, that's saying that they can be an impactful big league starter. That is not nothing. That is a really high grade. Only your Paul Skeens and those types of prospects, Jackson Jobe, are going to get that scouting outlook of frontline guy. But Brandon Sproat has the stuff to be that good if you can put it all together, and he's got a chance right now in big league camp to make a real impression on the coaching staff, the front office, who may at some point decide that it's time to turn over a spot in the rotation to Sproat during this season. If you think about upside, there are a few pitchers that have more upside in this organization right now than Brandon Sproat, and upside to potentially start a playoff game this year if he makes it through the marathon, if everything breaks right. It's not something I would necessarily bet on, but he's got a real shot at it a lot more than any other prospect in this system. So when you're talking about guys that can continue to make a name for themselves this spring, Brandon Sproat had to be the first one on the list. The next one that we're going to talk about, the top position player prospect in this system, I'm going to talk about Jett Williams and a few others in just a minute. First, though, quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started. There's no better place to get in on that action than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or you want to bet on that fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action all game long. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, You can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting, whether I'm backing up my team or maybe I am looking and trying to hedge my happiness a little bit. You can do whatever you want with those live bets. And the best part, the app is easy to use. And when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports when you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Our next goal is to get to 13,000 subscribers. I appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. As we look towards Jett Williams, the top hitting prospect in that system, I don't believe this is a guy that will be up in May or even June. But is there a chance that we see Jett Williams this season? I think there is, because if you have a hole in center field this year, Jett Williams, fairly high on the organizational depth chart. You are leaning on two guys that are really revered for the defense, and Jose Siri and Tyrone Taylor. Those guys are going to man the position. But if it gets to a point where the offense is just abysmal and one of those guys goes down, who's next up? I would say currently Luisangel Acuña. We'll talk about him a little bit in the final segment. But when you're looking at the other options in this organization, it's Drew Gilbert and it's Jett Williams. I guess you can throw an honorable mention to Alex Ramirez, but after his struggles last year, I'm just sort of out on him altogether as a prospect. Jett Williams, though, is the top prospect or the top position player prospect in this system. And he's only 21 years old, but he brings a lot of tools to the table. A really good defender wherever you put him, whether that is in center, whether it's short, whether it's second, an ability to get on base at a really high clip, a hit tool that is really going to be the one that could carry him to the big leagues. That's the one that he's got to focus on, because he's going to give you that disciplined approach in the box. He's going to draw his walks, but can he hit for high average? If he does, he becomes a real on-base threat. And then that speed that he has, the great athleticism, he can leverage that. And this is a guy that can steal a ton of bases. He missed pretty much all of last year with that wrist injury, played 22 games in AAA and then 22 games in AA and then got a couple in AAA just to extend his season. Then the Mets sent him to the Arizona Fall League, and he had a pretty respectable run there. You look at the numbers he posted in AA, a 529 OPS. Arizona Fall League, which is, I think, very comparable to AA competition. He had a 764 OPS, hit 2 home runs, 2 triples, 3 doubles. So nearly half of his hits went for extra bases. He stole 7 bags on 8 attempts. Pretty solid numbers. The batting average wasn't great, but small sample size. And that sample size, the 22 games that he played in AA, he matched that in the Fall League and actually matched it down to the same amount of plate appearances, 101 at each stop. So that just shows you this guy needs to play. Carlos Mendoza said it today. He needs to stay healthy and get a bunch of at-bats. So I don't expect to see him anytime soon. I don't think he would ever be a consideration for a bench role this year. That's what you have Acuña for. That's what you even to a certain extent would have a Ronnie Mauricio for, just because those guys are further along in their development and they aren't the top prospect in the system. You want to make sure that regardless of where he's at, Jett Williams is penciled in the lineup every single day. So if that opportunity eventually presents itself in the big leagues, maybe he can run with it. Until then, he's probably going to start the year in AA, I'd imagine, and then maybe get to AAA shortly. Or they might just decide, you know what, let's just throw him into the fire at AAA. But this is a prospect to watch. Okay, he's a guy that really has a ton of potential, and it's going to be really exciting to see what he does. I imagine he's going to get some run early in camp, and then eventually, of course, he'll be optioned down. But this is one of those guys that carries himself like a big leaguer before he actually is one. And so those type of players that have that level of confidence, they're going to really make an impression on their coaches. And we'll see what happens. He's got to do it in the minor leagues this year. He's got to play every day and put up really big numbers. but we watched him at 19 years old go from low A to double A in the season. There's no telling what he can do this year. So Jett Williams, definitely a name to watch in big league camp right now. The other one that we can reference who is another really exciting prospect in the system is Ryan Clifford. I actually spent a ton of time on Clifford a couple weeks back where I was breaking down the Mets' future at the corners in their farm system. Spent a lot of time on Ryan Clifford and a lot of time on Jesus Baez. Clifford, I don't know if he's going to repeat AA this year. I wouldn't be surprised if he does, at least to start the season. He's got the most power in the Mets system, but the question is going to be his hit tool. Is he a guy that's going to be a 200 batting average hitter, a 3 true outcomes guy where it's all strikeouts, walks, and home runs? He could be, and that could be fine, but you want to see him continue to refine that approach and see him tap into power a little bit better than he did last year. I don't think that Clifford can make an impression that really changes much of his 2025 outlook, but he's definitely a name to mention that's in big league camp right now, getting an opportunity here. So that is the top of the Mets farm system right now that's in big league camp, but there are still a couple guys that are still top 10 prospects to talk about. So I'm going to break down where things stand with Drew Gilbert and Luisangel Acuña in just a minute. First, though, another quick word from our sponsors. If you're an everyday listener of the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service. You'll get updates from me anytime news breaks in the match. You can ask me questions anytime. You can also take part in our Locked On Mets sign photo giveaways. If you want to be Locked On Mets insider, find a link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Before I forget, I should mention when it comes to pitching prospects, there are two other top prospects in the system that got invited to big league camp, Dom Hamill and Blade Tidwell. But those guys really struggled in AAA last year. Not to say that they aren't still top prospects. They are, but they got to show it in AAA. And I think there is some real reliever risk for both of these guys. You look at Hamill, 6.79 ERA and 27 starts in AAA. Blade Tidwell, 5.93 ERA and 85 innings pitched. They'll both get another full year in the AAA rotation to see what they can make of themselves. But I would not be surprised if either of them next year is working as a potential high leverage reliever, a guy with really good stuff that they're trying to mold into being a back end arm one day. They both have the ability to make that transition at some point. Obviously, you don't want to rush to that. So we'll see what those guys show. I don't know if we'll even see them, though, in any Grapefruit League games. They're in big league camp right now. Maybe they get an inning or two, but I'm just doubtful that we see either of them this year. Now let's talk about Drew Gilbert. Drew Gilbert, 24 years old. He was the other piece, or I guess at the time, the headlining piece of the Justin Verlander trade along with Ryan Clifford. Had a really good year in AA in 2023, particularly once he came over to Binghamton, had a lot of success. Last year was a lost year, had a hamstring pull that was severe, and he just missed pretty much the entire year. But he went to the Fall League along with Jett Williams, posted respectable numbers, 783 OPS, 4 home runs in 22 games. That's not bad. Walked more than he struck out. Got on base at a 380 clip. Gilbert is a prospect that has lost a lot of his intrigue because of the injury, because of his age relative to someone like Jett Williams, right? Top prospect analysts are going to look at a guy, Jett Williams, at 21, and they're going to keep him on their top 100 list a little more than a more veteran prospect, an older prospect in Drew Gilbert, who is 24, started playing more right field than center field. So all of a sudden that sort of docks him among evaluators. But I don't think anyone should give up on Drew Gilbert just yet. I think there's now that perceived fourth outfielder risk, but he's also a gamer, and you never know what a guy can, do to change an impression. I think Drew Gilbert has that opportunity. He's going to be in all these live, BP sessions right now in front of big league coaches facing big league arms. You see how he fares there. Maybe he gets into a game or two. This is going to be a very big year for Drew Gilbert. I don't want to paint it as a make or break year because he still is a prospect that has some time, but he's going to be in AAA for his second year, and it's not his fault. The injury really limited his potential last year, but it was still a lost year nonetheless. So now he's got to show that he can thrive in AAA, and maybe he does make an impact at some point this season. My only question is the playing time in right field. Is that due to Jett Williams getting some run in center field and the Mets sort of seeing that as the future where there might not be many opportunities for a Drew Gilbert in center? Or do they feel like he can't handle the position because that will really limit his top prospect status? Again, he's fallen off all the top 100 lists. I still think that there could be a big leaguer here in Drew Gilbert, and I'm very excited to see him get back on the field for a full season and just see what numbers he produces. Last but not least, though, is Luisangel Acuña. And I wanted to save Acuña for last because he is the guy that has the most to prove in spring training. I really think it is him or Brett Baty for that final bench spot. Now, there has been a report that Jose Iglesias will meet with the Mets this weekend or on Monday. I imagine that is for Iglesias to campaign to get signed by the Mets. He obviously wants to be back. Huge part of the team last year. And we'll see what comes of that. We'll see if the two sides end up coming to terms on a deal. If they do, guess what? All the intrigue on position battles and everything else, it goes away because the Mets would have their roster set in stone of their position players. Something that David Stern said he does not want to do, but you never know. If Jose Iglesias says, pay me $1 million, I just want to be back. I don't really care about the money. I just want to be part of this team. You might just say, you know what? Why not? It still makes us better. Let's just do it. I think Iglesias could get a much bigger role on a different team. I wouldn't necessarily say I want to see this happen, but I look at the Padres and think, why are they not all in on Iglesias? It would allow them to move Luis Arraez to DH. They could have Jake Cronenworth slide back to first, and Jose Iglesias could be their starting second baseman, giving them great defense. Or you can even, play a little bit of that utility role. I feel like he's a great fit there. I think there's other teams who should have been in on him this offseason, but maybe Iglesias wasn't really taking calls because he was just holding out. I hope that he would come back to the Mets. If Iglesias signs, all of this is a moot point when it comes to Luisangel Acuña. But if he doesn't, and the Mets really are true to what they've been saying, that they are ready to move on, then you are looking at Luisangel Acuña and Brett Baty as the real competition for that final bench spot. Now, granted, Jared Young is on the big league roster, guy that brings some pop from the left side, can play first, third, probably second still, but more of a corner guy than a middle infielder. He doesn't really bring the versatility you might like, but maybe you just love the left-handed bat. Nick Madrigal does bring that versatility. They're going to have Madrigal, getting some opportunities at shortstop this spring to see if he can do that. Because if he makes the roster, that would be the reason why. It would be because he would be in that bench utility role. I think it really just depends on a lot of different things. How does Jeff McNeil look in camp? If Jeff McNeil looks great and you're going to be rolling with McNeil, Lindor, Vientos, and Alonso pretty much every day, and your DH spot is pretty locked in as Jesse Winker and Starling Marte look good, all of a sudden that last spot on the bench might not play much, and you might say, you know what, screw it. Let's give it to Nick Madrigal. We're going to put Brett Baty and Luisangel Acuña in AAA where they can at least play every day, continue to develop, continue to build their own value, and then either they eventually get called up when somebody goes down, or maybe they improve their stock for the trade deadline when you might need those assets to go out and get a starting pitcher that can be an ace for you in the playoffs. So there's a lot to think about with the decisions the Mets are going to make here, but if it really is an open competition for that final bench spot, I think it will come down to Acuña and Baty. And Acuña, in a lot of ways, is the better fit for that bench role. He has the ability to go out and play center field if the Mets need him to. That's added versatility. And he can push those guys if they aren't hitting. Maybe Acuña gets some run out there. Maybe he gets a couple starts in center field a week. He is a great defender. He gives you a legitimate backup shortstop. We saw that last year. I think there's a lot to like with Luisangel Acuña, and I think he would be playing a role this year that he's really suited to play throughout his career. That I've talked about before, sort of the 10th man, kind of like the 6th man in the NBA, the 10th man on a big league team, the guy that throughout a season can start 15 games at 5 different positions and get 75 to maybe even maybe he plays 40 games at second and 15 in a bunch of other spots, and maybe he does still start over 100 games, but it's all across the diamond. Lindor goes down, which we knock on wood, you never want to see that happen. Acuña is going to be the guy that gets those starts. I think the only other option would be Ronnie Mauricio, And he's a guy that I really don't know what to make of it this time because he has to just prove healthy off the torn ACL. I think he's going to be in Syracuse playing every day until that question is answered. Acuña really is a guy that I think in the long run can play a huge role for the Mets for a long time because he has the speed, because he brings the versatility, because he is that spark plug where if a guy goes down, you plug Acuña into your lineup in the 9-hole and he can make some magic happen. We saw last year when Lindor went down. So I really like the idea of Acuña breaking camp with this team. Brett Baty, he brings another left-handed bat. I don't know what that's worth it to the Mets. They have a right-handed bench pretty heavily right now. If Jesse Winker's in the starting lineup at DH, you pretty much don't have a lefty off your bench because Brandon Nimmo, Juan Soto, they're going to be in the lineup. Francisco Lindor, switch hitter. Everybody else basically is right-handed. Tyrone Taylor, Jose Siri, right-handed. Luis Torrens, right-handed. Starling Marte, right-handed. So to have another lefty that you can call on, maybe that is something the Mets value. They also might just value Baty as a more, established guy than Acuña, someone who has played more games in the minor leagues, has been a better hitter in the minor leagues, a bigger guy who theoretically brings more power to your team. I just think Acuña really fits. So we'll see. We'll see if Acuña can win that role. We'll see if the Mets maybe do surprise us and all of a sudden we get the news over the weekend or on Monday that they decided, you know what, we're going to bring Jose Iglesias back. If they do that, it's still a solid move for the Mets because you're clearly improving the floor of your team. You're bringing in a guy that can platoon with Jeff McNeil at second base, and we saw the value in that last year. You're bringing a great clubhouse guy back, and you're essentially running back the 2024 OMG Mets without Luis Severino and Jose Quintana, but you replace them with Clay Holmes and Frankie Montas, and you brought in Juan Soto. So the Mets decided to do that. I'm not going to hate on the move. I think it makes sense to let Acuña have that role. But again, it could be just as valuable for Acuña to get another season in AAA. And who knows, maybe he has a 950 OPS, really turns a lot of heads. And all of a sudden at the trade deadline, you have an asset that can be flipped to get you Sandy Alcantara or Dylan Cease or whoever might be available at that time. The Mets have a lot of good options here. I think the players to really watch this spring above all others, though, it's Brandon Sproat on the pitching side when you're talking about prospects. It's obviously some Jett Williams, some Drew Gilbert, but particularly Luisangel Acuña. I think we're going to see Acuña and Brett Baty in the lineup almost every day throughout the Grapefruit League to see what you have with those two guys, as they will get a ton of run to sort of see which one can potentially grab that final spot. Anyway, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. I appreciate all of you for tuning in. As we start gearing towards the season, a lot of things are said. News can be made in camp. And so if and when that happens, I will get back to doing more weekend shows. And of course, once the regular season starts, I will go back to 7 days a week, truly giving you your team every day. So as always, make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. If you want to follow me on social media, you can do so at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listener, your first watch every day. Now for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything the world of sports. We're talking about Locked On Sports today with our local host from each team, league-wide host from each league. Find Locked On Sports today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.